Okay, let's dive right into this explainer. Picture this for a second. Millions of people walking for literally weeks, braving all kinds of weather, and they're all moving toward one single destination. Every single year in Maharashtra, India, there's this immense, awe-inspiring pilgrimage called Wari. You've got countless devotees trekking for weeks, carrying the palanquins of great saints like Gnaneshwar and Tukaram, all making their way to a town called Pandurpur. But who are they walking all this way to see? Well, they're going to meet their absolute beloved deity, Lord Vitthal. And today, we're going to unpack the fascinating stories and, honestly, some pretty profound life lessons that are hidden right in plain sight on the very body of this extraordinary idol. But right off the bat, we have to address a massive visual mystery. Because when you finally get to Pandurpur and see Lord Vitthal, you don't find a deity sitting on some grand ornate throne or riding a mythical creature like you might expect. Instead, you see a deity who has been standing on a simple single brick with his hands just resting on his hips for 800 years. So, why is he waiting like this? And more importantly, who is he waiting for?
To answer that, we're going to decode the physical anatomy of the idol and the architecture of his temple. Here is our roadmap for today. 1. The brick. 2. The footprint. 3. The turban. And 4. The threshold.
Starting with number 1, the brick, and the story of Pandalik. To really get this, we have to start down at the very base of the idol. What's really wild here is the literal translation of the deity's name. In the local language, Vit means brick, and Thal means standing. So Vitthal quite literally translates to the form of Lord Vishnu who is standing on a brick. Pretty straightforward, right? But to understand exactly how that brick got there in the first place, we need to talk about the dramatic transformation of a man named Pandalik. So Pandalik lived with his wife and his elderly parents, Janudev and Satyavati. But honestly, he was not a good son. He neglected his parents completely. One day, he decides he wants to earn some spiritual merit, so he heads off on a long pilgrimage to Kashi Vishwanath. Along the way, he stops to crash at the ashram of a sage named Kukut Rishi. And while he's there, he witnesses something that completely blows his mind. He sees these women walk into the ashram wearing absolutely filthy, muddy clothes. They clean up the space, and then they magically transform into these beautiful, glowing figures before walking out. Pandalik eventually figures out that these women were actually India's holy rivers in human form. They were coming to this ashram to cleanse themselves of the sins that people left behind when bathing in them. And why this specific ashram? Because Kukut Rishi's pure, unwavering devotion to his own parents had made the space that incredibly sacred. This realization hit Pandalik like a ton of bricks. He realized that true, ultimate devotion doesn't mean you have to travel across the country to a distant temple. It starts right at home. So he immediately turned right around and dedicated the rest of his life to serving his elderly parents. Well, Pandalak's devotion became so legendary that Lord Vishnu himself came down to earth just to bless him. It was pouring rain that day, mud everywhere. When Vishnu showed up at Pandalak's humble little hut, Pandalak was right in the middle of massaging his sleeping father's feet. Now, you'd think if the creator of the universe showed up at your door, you'd jump up to say hi, right? Not Pandalak. Instead, he casually tosses a brick out into the mud and actually tells Lord Vishnu to wait. He basically says, hey, my dad is resting and my duty to my parents comes first. Vishnu was so deeply moved by this supreme act of devotion that he wasn't even mad. He simply placed his hands on his hips, stood on the brick, and waited with a smile. Later on, Pandalak asked Vishnu to stay in that exact form forever, standing on a brick, hands on hips, so devotees for centuries could come and experience it. And this story perfectly illustrates why the temple at Pandurpur just throws the traditional rulebook out the window. In standard Hindu temples, the idols almost always face east, and devotees are kept at a strict distance. You absolutely cannot touch the deity. But at Pandurpur, Lord Vitthal faces west. Why? Because Pandalik's ashram was to the west, and Vitthal just wants to keep looking at his favorite devotee. Plus, devotees here are actually allowed to physically embrace and touch the idol's feet. The logic behind it is just beautiful. Vitthal is here purely out of love. And honestly, what kind of love exists without touch? All right, moving to number 2, the footprint and the test of Bhrigu Rishi. As we move our investigation up from the feet to the chest of the deity, we hit our second big visual mystery. If you were to look really closely at Lord Vithal's chest, you'd see this distinct mark of a footprint. This actually takes us back to a pretty shocking event involving a famously hot-tempered sage named Bhrigu Rishi. One day, Lord Vishnu was in a really deep sleep. Bhrigu Rishi comes over to meet him, keeps yelling his name, but Vishnu just doesn't wake up. Well, Bhrigu Rishi gets so incredibly enraged that he's being ignored, he just snaps. He unleashes his anger and violently kicks the sleeping Lord Vishnu squarely in the chest. Now, you'd probably expect the Supreme Being to, I don't know, completely obliterate someone for that level of disrespect. But instead, Lord Vishnu wakes up, sees exactly who kicked him, and immediately grabs Bhrigu Rishi's foot. He looks up at him with total, genuine concern and asks, "Did your foot get hurt? My body is very hard, but you kicked me so hard, I really hope you aren't injured." So that footprint on Vithal's chest, that is Bhrigu Rishi's. And Vitthal wears it forever as this permanent, literal badge of immense patience and forgiveness. Bhrigu Rishi was, of course, deeply ashamed and instantly apologized. Vishnu's wife, goddess Lakshmi, on the other hand, she was absolutely furious about the insult to her husband, and she actually cursed Bhrigu Rishi to a life of eternal poverty. But Vitthal, just as a pure testament to his boundless tolerance, still proudly wears the mark of his devotee's strike to this day. Okay, section 3, the turban and the unity of Harihar. Let's shift our focus up to the very top of the idol to investigate what looks like a really unique headpiece. So from a distance, it completely looks like Lord Vitthal is wearing this classic, traditional turban. But when you get up close, that optical illusion totally vanishes. It is actually a Shivalinga resting perfectly on top of his head. You know, people have spent centuries debating over who is greater, Lord Shiva or Lord Vishnu, or who came first. Well, this design beautifully settles that whole debate right then and there. It's the ultimate representation of Harihar, this profound concept that Shiva and Vishnu aren't two competing entities, they are fundamentally one. When you're looking at Lord Vitthal, you are literally seeking blessings from both Vishnu and Shiva at the exact same time. And finally, section 4, the threshold, and Sancho Kamala. For this last structural mystery, we're going to zoom out from the idol itself and look at the physical architecture of the temple entrance. Because we absolutely have to talk about a deeply moving figure in this history, Sant Chokamela. He lived during a really dark time when harsh, tragic caste discrimination was just the norm. Because society labeled him as belonging to a lower caste, he was strictly forbidden from ever stepping foot inside the temple. But his devotion? It was completely unbreakable. For his entire life, Sant Chokamela just sat on the outside, praying fervently, bowing to a god that he was never, ever allowed to see up close or touch. But Lord Vitthal? He ended up eradicating this man-made discrimination in the most spectacular, permanent way possible. Vitthal made it clearly known that he considered himself entirely incomplete without his beloved Chokamela. So when the saint passed away, his samadhi, which is his final resting place, was constructed right at the threshold, right at the very entrance of the temple. And the modern-day relevance of this is just incredible. Today, if you want to enter that temple to see Lord Vitthal, it does not matter one bit if you are a king, a billionaire, high caste, or low caste. Every single person must first approach that threshold and physically bow their head to Sant Chokamela's samadhi. You literally cannot reach God without first showing absolute reverence to the very devotee that society once outcasted. Vitthal essentially took a good, devoted human being and elevated him above his own divine status. Section 5. The true meaning of Vitthal. Now that we've decoded the brick, the footprint, the turban, and the threshold, let's tie it all together into the true, profound message of this deity. Earlier, we talked about one literal translation of the name Vitthal. But if you dig into Kannada and Marathi grammar, there's a much deeper definition. V actually stands for knowledge, and Thal stands for the receiver or the place where it is acquired. So basically, Vitthal represents the ultimate refuge of knowledge. The beautiful promise here is that no matter how ignorant or lost in the dark you might feel, simply approaching this space is going to cast a ray of wisdom into your life. And you know, a lot of times that wisdom comes down to just surrendering control. Sometimes we pray desperately for things and we just don't get them. But as the old wisdom reminds us, if it happens your way, it's good. But if not, it's even better. Why? Because when things aren't going according to your plan, it means they're going according to a much higher divine plan. So I'll leave you with this thought. The next time life makes you wait or really test your patience, ask yourself, are you willing to trust the wisdom of a God who happily stood on a brick in the mud just to honor the love of his devotee?